Hello and welcome to my brand new podcast. This is the Microsoft Business IT podcast. I'm your host, Matt Weston. Just a bit of an introduction to what I'm trying to achieve with this podcast before we really start getting into the nitty-gritty of technology and business. And it really is to talk about the combination of the two. Generally now, businesses cannot operate without some level of technology. And with my background as being both a business owner and also with my background as being a Microsoft specialist, whether that is from what we call the Power Platform, which is where we can build apps and automations, or through to the modern workplace, which is more of your communications and where you store files and how you work together. I'm going to try and bring out my learnings from growing my own business, Vantage 365, over the last few years, and how technology, and particularly Microsoft technology, has really helped me on this journey. Over the weeks, I'm going to start to bring on additional people as well, because there are lots of learnings from people other than me that you can really get the most from. So whether they are some of my colleagues in my own business, or whether they are people that I network with, or people who have just got something that they can bring to you. Because that's the main reason why we're doing this, is so that I can share with you learnings, things that or traps that I fell into in the early days of starting Vantage 365, but also looking at ways that you can make yourself scalable so that you don't fall into some of the real pitfalls that I've seen with other business owners, and particularly small business owners, that has actually hampered their progress longer term. And some small things that we can do right at the very beginning, particularly again with a focus on Microsoft technology and Microsoft Cloud, about some of the small ways of working that we can implement immediately that's really going to help us in the future. So to start off with today, I'm going to really talk around one of the key things that we do within our businesses. We store or create and store files. Now, for those of you who are using Microsoft 365, and it doesn't really matter what level of license you're working at with this, it could be a small business, or you could have gone straight to enterprise, wherever it is that you sit, you will have lots of different places that you can store files. And that is probably one of the biggest issues with Microsoft technology, is that there are several ways to do everything. So you'll be forgiven if you have fallen into some of the traps that I've seen people fall into, because it's so easy. Because certainly in the early days of creating a business, you know what? You do what's easiest. What is going to take the least time? Because ultimately, time is the one thing that we've only got a finite amount of time of. And I have a business coach, his name is Lewis Hayden, and he's in his podcasts is always talking about there's only 24 hours in a day. It doesn't matter who we are, what we do, how much money we have, where we are in our journey. That is facts. There is only 24 hours in a day. So we do what is easiest for us to make it to basically make the most of the time that we've got available. Because certainly from a business owner perspective, in the early days, you're doing your marketing, you're doing your finances, you're still trying to deliver, you're still trying to sell, you're trying to do everything. So you shortcut. And so when it comes to creating the files that we need, whether they're proposals, dashboards, whatever they are, we store them somewhere. Now in Microsoft 365, there are different places that we can store it. And generally it falls into one of two categories. It either falls into OneDrive, or OneDrive for Business, or your files go into SharePoint and Teams. Now I'm going to lump the two together because effectively they are one and the same. But ultimately, whether it's OneDrive or SharePoint and Teams, as long as we're storing it somewhere in the cloud to start off with, you know what, that's a good habit to be in to begin with. So if you are already doing that, well done so far. But if we just constantly store things in OneDrive, and OneDrive is usually the place where we find all of our files, and I've seen this with a number of small business owners that we've worked with, that generally all of our files just go into my personal OneDrive. Because let's face it, when we're starting out, generally It might be one or two of you. When you go and set up your Windows machine, apologies to any Mac users here, but I'm generally with Windows, it wants you to connect to OneDrive. So you sign in with your Microsoft 365 credentials, and your OneDrive then appears on your desktop, and so it's the natural place to go and put your information and your documents. Now, in the early days, that's all well and good. That's absolutely fine. Like I said, that's not a bad thing. That's a better place to be than just storing things on a local machine that's not being synchronized. Because if you do have a sudden issue with your laptop, your hard drive goes down, you lose it. In my case, my kids get hold of it and do something with it, then you lose those documents. If it's in OneDrive, then it's synchronizing to the cloud. So fantastic, great work so far. But let's get a real focus on what the key differences are between OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams, and by understanding what the use cases are, we can understand why some of the pitfalls that business owners fall into is all to do with storing our files in OneDrive. So OneDrive is your personal storage space. Think of it as my own drive. No one else has access to that drive by default. And notice I say by default because you can go into OneDrive and you can share files with other people in your organization or outside of your organization. So it can be used as a repository, but ultimately it is tied to you. Now, that has a number of limitations, particularly as we grow, because if I then bring on a second person, so as an example, in my own personal journey, 9 months into creating my business, I employed my first person. Now, all of a sudden, the organization needs to share and collaborate on files and documents with more than just me. It's no longer all about me. It's about now starting to foster working as a team. Now, if I'm using files that are in my OneDrive, each time I create a file, and yes, I can create a folder, but I have to go and physically share it with somebody else for them to be able to access it and for them to be able to collaborate. Now, one of the big advantages of having things in Microsoft 365 is that we can easily collaborate, whether that is we all open the document and work on it at the same time, or we've got them stored centrally and everybody knows where to find them. So being in OneDrive actually now starts to hamper my progress as I grow. Because if I'm going away from from my office or from my desk, I might be out on site with a customer, I might be in a meeting. If I'm lucky enough, particularly in the early years, I might be on holiday. But I'm still tying myself back to the business, because unless I physically go and share the documents that are in my OneDrive, nobody else can access them. And I guarantee you, because this is just the way the world works, it's the way that things always work out. The thing that you haven't shared, or the document that you haven't shared, is the document that your colleagues or the people that you want to that you're working with, the one that they want to access. So what's going to happen? They're going to be contacting you while you're away from the office, away from your laptop. It could be you're on holiday, and so you're having to then jump back on to enable access to that file because it's in your personal area, so nobody else can get to it. So this is one of the key things that, again, I've seen business owners fall into this trap, because all of a sudden now they are making themselves that single point of failure for their business. Not only because they're, as a small business owner, we're still trying to do everything, but actually we've now locked everything away and we are only giving access on an ad hoc basis, rather than making things more centrally available and allowing people to collaborate. What's the worst that happens? Not only are you getting disturbed while you're away, but you're also actually bringing your business to a halt by not sharing it. So, where does SharePoint come into this then? So we've said that OneDrive is my personal area. Let's talk about SharePoint, and I'll briefly talk about Teams as well. So SharePoint is an area that is designed for, as it says in the name, for sharing. So I can now have that central place where I can store my documents. Now I might have a SharePoint site. I have different sites for different areas of the business. I might have a site for all of my sales documents. I might have a site for all of my project documents, or a site per project. How we shape that really comes down to you and how you run your business. But if I bring it into SharePoint, then I can allow others in my company or in my organization to go and access the files directly from there. And I can give access to the site, not just to the folder or not just to that one particular file, but to an entire site. So if I now drop 100 documents into that site, then my colleagues are going to be able to go and collaborate and find the information in that site. So now I'm fostering a much more open culture about collaboration, and ultimately about sharing. And if I'm now encouraging my colleagues and my employees to do exactly the same, which is when you create something, go and put it into that shared library, into that shared area, then fantastic, we've now got people collaborating. That means if I bring somebody else in, I've only got to give them access to that site, not access to every single share or every single file or folder that I've created in OneDrive or anywhere else that I've decided to store that content. So ultimately, this is a very, very small habit change just to take me away from OneDrive into SharePoint and storing my files there, because that is going to allow me to break the reliance on me or you as the content owner, because we are sharing it. From going back to the pros of OneDrive, absolutely. If it's a file that only you need to access, it's your personal file, put it in OneDrive. You've got up to 1 terabyte of space in there. You can go higher with with various licenses, but work on 1 terabyte of space that you can go and store your personal data. Personal, not company data. Company data, things that we need to share, things that we need to collaborate on, scurry away into SharePoint. But one of the key things with OneDrive is it appears on our local machine, so it synchronizes down. Now, one of the big misunderstandings with SharePoint is that a lot of people don't realize that you can do exactly the same. So when you're accessing your SharePoint sites and you go into your document library, you have 2 ways of being able to make it available on your local machine. The first is you can go and press sync. You'll see a little button on the top, and that will then create, again, a local folder on your own computer, which then means that your SharePoint document library appears on your file system. So particularly those of you who are used to using things such as folders and file systems, file shares, let's face it, we've all used them in the past, then that means that we can bring a little bit more of that experience back. We can create that. The alternative, and you can find your own ways of being able to do this, and we might talk about this in a future podcast. But I can synchronize my document library into OneDrive. So it then appears as a folder in my OneDrive, which means it's then going to synchronize down. So when I go to my OneDrive on my local machine, I can navigate from my OneDrive into that SharePoint document library, and again, I can work on my files. So very, very small change can actually save you a huge amount of work, particularly if you do this earlier on in your Microsoft 365 journey. Don't fall into the pitfall of putting it into OneDrive just because it's there and just because it's easy. Start thinking about how we are going to scale this, how we are going to make it as manageable as possible by making our files available for us to collaborate on and for us to share. So the question that I'm preempting here is, but what about Teams? Should I be putting my files in Teams instead of SharePoint? Again, a little bit of myth busting here, particularly from those from a purely business background. When you put files into Teams, they get stored in SharePoint. So by putting your files into the Files tab in Teams, so you've got a team created and you've got your Files tab, you're going to go and drop your files into there. Then actually behind the scenes, there's a SharePoint site sitting, and it is where the files are being stored. Once you've done that, you know what? You're into the same realm then of the benefits of storing things directly in SharePoint. But ultimately, if it's in Teams, you know what? We're bringing in the chat aspect of it as well. And again, we'll talk about Teams in more detail in future podcasts. But ultimately, if you take one thing away from today, it's going to be keep your OneDrive for your personal files only, and get into a habit of putting anything that you want to collaborate on into SharePoint. Even if it's just you at the moment, but you've still got plans to scale it, put it in SharePoint, because again, it's going to save you a huge amount of work in the future. And if it saves you work in the future, it's going to save you time. Remember, we've only got 24 hours in a day. So it's going to save us time, which means we don't have to rework things. And ultimately, it's going to help us to work more effectively as a team in the future. So that's a little bit of a preamble, a little bit of positioning. Hopefully you're starting to get a feel for what this podcast is going to be about. So I'm going to be talking about the benefits of business, the benefits of IT, particularly Microsoft Cloud, and I'm applying it to my own business learnings. If you do have questions, or if you want some more information, then you can reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn. Find me at Matt Weston. You can feel free to email me. So you can email me, matt@mattweston365.com. Or if you want to get my work address, it's Matthew with 2 T's, .weston @vantage365.co.uk. And I'll be happy to answer any questions or tackle any topics that you've got a burning desire to understand more about. For now, I hope that's useful, and I will really look forward to speaking to you again on the next podcast.